For nearly 2,000 years, one silence has echoed louder than 1,000 sermons. A child appears in Jerusalem, astonishing the teachers in the temple. Then the record closes. No journey, no apprenticeship, no hidden school, no desert diary, no royal archive, just silence. And when the story opens again, that same child is a man of about 30, walking out of obscurity and into history. That gap, those missing years, has become one of the most dangerous empty spaces in religious storytelling. Because silence does something to the human mind. It invites theories. It attracts certainty. It rewards anyone bold enough to say, the truth was hidden. And now, in the age of viral revelations, that silence has been given a new setting. Ethiopia, ancient monasteries, gaze manuscripts, forgotten books, the Ethiopian Bible. And attached to it all, a modern voice with cultural weight, Mel Gibson, the filmmaker who turned the suffering of Christ into one of the most controversial religious films in modern history. But this is where the room changes. Because the deeper the investigation goes, the stranger the mystery becomes. The Ethiopian tradition is real. Its biblical canon is wider than most Western Christians realize. It preserved texts like 1st Enoch and Jubilees in full when other traditions did not. Its manuscripts are ancient, its church is old, its authority is not invented. And yet the central claim, the one that says Jesus' years from 12 to 30 were deleted, and that Ethiopia proves it, does not sit cleanly on the evidence. So the mystery is no longer just what happened in the lost years of Jesus. And the mystery is this: if Ethiopia preserved something extraordinary, what exactly was preserved? And if nothing was deleted, why has the silence between 12 and 30 become so powerful that entire generations are willing to believe it was? The confirmed historical starting point is deceptively simple. In the canonical New Testament, the strongest narrative gap in Jesus' life appears between the boyhood scene in Luke, where he is presented in the temple at age 12, and the beginning of his public ministry, when Luke says he was about 30. The canonical Gospels do not provide a detailed account of what happened in those intervening years. That is real. The silence is real. But silence is not the same thing as suppression. Scholarly reconstructions of Jesus' life generally place his birth somewhere around 7 to 4 BCE, yes, with his death often estimated around the late 20s or early 30s CE. In other words, historians do attempt to frame his lifespan, but they do so from scattered evidence, not from a complete biography. Ancient gospel writers were not modern journalists constructing cradle-to-grave documentaries. They wrote theological narratives centered on mission, teaching, crucifixion, and resurrection. Another confirmed fact is that the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth. It recognizes a wider biblical canon than most Protestant and Catholic communities, including texts unfamiliar to many Western audiences, such as 1st Enoch. That does not make the tradition fringe. It makes it ancient, independent, and textually important. And a further confirmed fact complicates the viral narrative even more. Ethiopia genuinely preserved textual traditions of immense value. Scholar Brandon W. Hawk notes that 1st Enoch and Jubilees survive in complete form only in Ge'ez, even though fragments or portions exist in other languages. That is one reason Ethiopian Christianity matters so much in the history of biblical transmission. It did preserve texts the West often ignored, minimized, or lost in complete form. But those preserved texts are not the same thing as a hidden travel diary of Jesus' teenage and young adult years. The manuscript story is also real. The Garima Gospels, ancient Ge'ez gospel books associated with Abba Garima Monastery, are among the oldest surviving Ethiopian manuscripts known to modern scholars, with radiocarbon ranges placing parts of them broadly between late antiquity and the early medieval period. They are powerful evidence of an early and deeply rooted Ethiopian Christian manuscript culture. Where scholarship becomes more nuanced is in the question of non-canonical Jesus traditions. There are early Christian writings outside the New Testament that attempt to fill in parts of Jesus' childhood. One major example is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, a non-canonical text describing Jesus between the ages of 5 and 12. It was not accepted into the New Testament canon, and early Christian authorities treated it as heretical or unreliable. Even so, it spread widely and influenced later imagination, art, and storytelling. That matters because it reveals a recurring historical pattern. When canonical texts leave silence, later communities create narrative bridges. Those bridges may be devotional, legendary, theological, imaginative, or sometimes all four at once. Scholars debate how these texts functioned, who used them, and how seriously they were taken in different regions. But the mainstream scholarly position does not treat them as straightforward recovered biography. There is also debate over canon itself. Western Christians often speak as though the Bible has always been one fixed and universally agreed collection. Historically, that is too neat. Different communities carry different lists, emphases, and manuscript traditions. Ethiopia is one of the clearest surviving reminders that Christian textual history was more diverse than many modern believers assume. The existence of a broader Ethiopian canon is therefore not conspiracy evidence. Now, it is evidence of historical plurality inside Christianity. Then come the speculative theories, the ones that thrive in documentaries, podcasts, and algorithm-driven thumbnails. These are the claims that Jesus traveled to India, studied in secret monasteries, learned esoteric disciplines in Egypt, crossed into Britain, or left behind teachings the institutional church later buried. Such theories are culturally powerful precisely because the canonical gap exists. But their popularity is not the same thing as proof. And then there is the celebrity layer. In recent viral content, Mel Gibson is often presented as though he publicly confirmed extraordinary Ethiopian Bible revelations. Yet in a widely circulated transcript of his 2025 Joe Rogan appearance, there is no mention of the Ethiopian Bible as the source of Jesus' lost years. Yet he speaks openly about Christianity, faith, church conflict, relics, and biblical themes, but not that specific viral claim. That does not prove he never said anything elsewhere. It simply means the investigated high-profile source does not support the exact internet narrative attached to his name. And that is where the anomaly appears. Because if the Ethiopian Bible truly exposed the years from 12 to 30, then the trail should be obvious. There should be a text, a title, a manuscript witness, a passage, a tradition inside Ethiopian Christianity clearly proclaiming where Jesus went and what he did during those missing years. But the evidence does not behave that way. Instead, the investigation finds something more slippery. Ethiopia preserved important books, yes. It preserved Enoch. It preserved Jubilees. It preserved a broader canon and ancient manuscript traditions. But those facts are repeatedly blended online with non-canonical childhood gospels, modern speculation, and celebrity branding. Until the audience is left with a conclusion, the evidence never cleanly stated. The problem, then, is not a lack of mystery. It is too much mystery being poured into the wrong container. The title says, deleted. History says, not recorded. The title says, exposed. Scholarship says, interpreted. The title says, 1,700-year lie. The manuscript trail says, different canons, different communities, different priorities. That mismatch is the real anomaly. Because once the viewer sees it, a second question emerges. If the strongest evidence points not to deletion but to absence, then why has the idea of deletion become so emotionally irresistible? Yet the breakthrough does not come from a single hidden scroll. It comes from technology and from restraint. In recent manuscript research, scholars have begun using AI not as a mystical oracle, but as a disciplined tool. A PLOS One study introduced an AI-based model called Enoch, combining radiocarbon dating with handwriting analysis to estimate the dates of Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts. The point was not to decode secret doctrine, but to sharpen chronology. In some cases, the findings suggested that certain manuscripts may be older than previously assumed. That matters here for one reason above all. It shows what AI can do in the world of ancient texts. It can compare letter forms. It can detect scribal features. It can correlate style with dated samples. It can help scholars reevaluate manuscript timelines. It can assist in restoration, imaging, classification, and pattern recognition. But AI cannot do what viral mythology often asks of it. It cannot watch a manuscript and discover where Jesus physically traveled. It cannot pull erased history out of theological silence. It cannot transform late devotional tradition into eyewitness journalism. And it cannot prove a deleted chapter of Jesus' life unless such a text demonstrably exists. That is the sober breakthrough. The tools are stronger than ever, But the evidence is still evidence. It does not become more dramatic just because the software gets better. At the same time, digital access to manuscripts and wider scholarly attention to Ethiopian traditions have changed the conversation. The old Western assumption that if a text did not circulate widely in Europe, it must be marginal, has weakened. Ethiopia is no longer treated as a footnote. It stands as a major witness to the diversity of biblical history, and that alone is enough to unsettle old assumptions. So the new discovery is not that a machine uncovered Jesus' lost diary. It is that modern tools are forcing scholars and audiences alike to confront a harder truth. Ancient Christianity was broader, stranger, and more geographically diverse than the simplified Western story ever admitted. As the argument pivots from celebrity claim to manuscript reality, one visual beat becomes especially powerful. This is the moment where the film should slow down. The narration should let the viewer feel that Ethiopia is not a prop in a conspiracy story. It is a living Christian civilization with its own canon, language, theology, and textual memory. And this is where the stakes rise. Because once Ethiopia is restored to the story as a real historical actor, rather than a mysterious backdrop, two worlds collide. On one side stand popular storytellers, internet channels, and headline makers who thrive on the language of exposure. They promise that everything familiar is false, everything forgotten is explosive, and every silence is proof of suppression. On the other side stand historians, textual scholars, and careful theologians who know that ancient evidence rarely arrives with cinematic certainty. They know that canon formation was messy. They know communities preserve different books. They know texts migrate, evolve, translate, and acquire new meaning over centuries. And they know the most frustrating truth of all: some silences remain silent. Even Mel Gibson's public role complicates the picture. And he is undeniably a powerful religious cultural figure. And in public interviews, he speaks with intense conviction about Christianity, the passion narrative, church corruption, spiritual warfare, and sacred history. That is real. But the leap from Mel Gibson is outspoken about Jesus to Mel Gibson verified a deleted Ethiopian record of Jesus' hidden years is far larger than viral media often admits. In the researched transcript examined here, that specific claim is absent. Institutional hesitation also enters the frame here, but not as cartoon villainy. Churches are cautious because canon is not just a reading list. It is identity, it is liturgy, it is continuity. Scholars are cautious because manuscript evidence must be dated, compared, translated, contextualized, and challenged. And the public is often impatient with caution because caution does not trend. That tension is the true drama, not a secret vault, not a smoking gun, but a conflict between slow evidence and fast certainty. And in that conflict, the audience begins to realize something unsettling. The most explosive story may not be that the church erased Jesus' hidden years. The explosive story may be that modern culture can no longer tolerate an unanswered question. There are, in the end, several ways to read this mystery. The conventional explanation is the least glamorous and, for that reason, perhaps the most historically plausible. The canonical Gospels did not aim to narrate every year of Jesus' life. They were shaped around his public ministry, death, and theological significance. Ancient biographical writing was selective, not exhaustive, and the silence between 12 and 30 may simply reflect authorial priority. The evangelists were not hiding those years. They were not interested in them in the same way later audiences would be. Under this reading, the gap is not evidence of censorship. It is evidence of genre. The alternative explanation is more expansive. It holds that early Christianity was far more textually diverse than later canons solidified, and that some communities preserved traditions others ignored. From this angle, Ethiopia matters profoundly, not because it hands over a neat secret biography of Jesus, but because it proves that the Christian textual world was never as uniform as many later traditions pretended. And the Ethiopian canon preserves books such as 1st Enoch in ways that changed modern scholarship's understanding of what ancient believers read and valued. Under this reading, the phrase deleted is too crude, but overlooked or excluded by other traditions may describe part of the broader canon story. Then there is the skeptical interpretation. It argues that the entire Jesus from 12 to 30 was deleted, and Ethiopia proves it. Narrative is a modern content formula. It takes a real gap in the Gospels, combines it with a real Ethiopian canon, adds a real celebrity name, then turns the blend into a dramatic certainty unsupported by any single decisive text. Under this reading, the mystery is not ancient suppression at all, it is modern amplification. The skeptical position does not deny Ethiopia's importance, in fact, and it often protects that importance from distortion. It says the Ethiopian tradition deserves to be understood on its own terms, not mined as a dramatic prop for claims it never clearly makes. And then there is the interpretation many viewers may find hardest to dismiss, a hybrid view. In that version, no one grand conspiracy is necessary. No single council needs to have deleted a chapter of Jesus' life. Instead, what happened is more human and more complicated. Different communities chose different books. Some texts survived in one language and vanished in another. Some narratives were treasured devotionally, but not canonized liturgically. Some traditions became central in Rome or Constantinople. Others remained central in Ethiopia. Over time, the dominant story hardened, and everything outside it became easy to label suspicious. Fringe, or forgotten. That is not the same as a lie. But it is also not a simple tale of transparency. And perhaps that is why the Ethiopian Bible continues to fascinate. Not because it solves the mystery cleanly, but because it reopens the feeling that history was larger than what most people were taught. Why does this matter so much? Because the missing years of Jesus are not just a historical gap, they are a mirror. Into that silence, every age projects its own hunger. Some project a hidden master of esoteric wisdom. Some imagine a traveler between civilizations. Some want a revolutionary erased by institutions. Some want proof that the West never told the full story. And some simply want the comfort of one more missing piece falling into place. But perhaps the deeper power lies elsewhere. Perhaps what unsettles the modern viewer is not that there are unknown years in Jesus' life. It is that the central figure of one of the world's largest religions can still resist total capture. The archive is incomplete. The canon is contested across traditions. The manuscripts are ancient but not limitless. And the silence remains, demanding humility from believers, skeptics, historians, and storytellers alike. Ethiopia changes this conversation because it reminds the world that Christian memory was never held by one language, one empire, or one canon alone. It survived in African monasteries, in Ge'ez manuscripts, in communities that preserved books many others forgot. That is not a footnote. That is a correction to historical imagination. Source. And AI changes the conversation because it proves that the future of ancient history will not belong only to ruins and dust. Machines can help redate handwriting, compare fragments, and refine chronology. Yet the machine's greatest lesson may be restraint. It can illuminate the edge of mystery, but it cannot abolish mystery itself. Source. So the viewer is left not with a solved case, but with a more honest wonder. Maybe the real revelation is not that a lie lasted 1,700 years. Maybe the revelation is that the world kept mistaking complexity for deception and silence for proof of a secret. And so the final image is not a courtroom, not a confession, not a buried chapter suddenly read aloud to the world. It is a manuscript page in an ancient language, a boy in the temple, a man at the river about 30 years old. And between them, a silence that no empire, no algorithm, no filmmaker, and no internet theory has ever fully conquered. The unresolved question remains, did history erase something, or did humanity simply never stop trying to write itself into the silence around Jesus? Because if Ethiopia preserved anything truly dangerous, it may not be a lost biography. It may be the reminder that history is bigger than the version most people inherit. If the audience has a theory, conventional, alternative, or skeptical, it should leave it below. Because this mystery was never powered by certainty. It was powered by the gap.